Welcome to the 21st reading of my memoir, The Innocence of Guilt. Park Farm. So we were off again, all packed into a removal van, the familiar routine. Dad in the front with the driver, the rest of us in the back on the floor with the furniture and the animals. As we reached the outskirts of Colchester and the van turned off Mersey Road onto Beerchurch Hall Road, overhead tree branches brushed the roof of the van. The loud sound drowned out our conversation and enclosed us in a tunnel of noise. Not until the van stopped at the top gate of the drive leading down to the farm did silence and our new life greet us. Mum immediately fell in love with our new place, the bungalow, Park Farm. Not much bigger than the hut, and its amenities not a whole lot better either, but by this time I don't think she cared. She would make the best of it. Picturesque, the cedar bungalow was set in its own garden area, encircled by a hedge and a gate. The lavatory, an outdoor one, at one end of the garden, connected to a cesspool, which had to be emptied periodically, a bit of a letdown. But there were two large sheds, beautiful flowering rhododendron bushes, and plenty of room for a vegetable and flower garden. The tiny kitchen had a gas cooker and cold water sink with a hand pump which brought water from a well outside. Off the kitchen, a small living room with a coal-burning fireplace, two bedrooms, and a front room that became Dindin's bedroom. Wooden floors throughout, a welcome improvement on the concrete floors of the hut. I helped Mum make up the beds, being careful to fold the ends of the sheets into hospital corners, a skill she taught me from her nursing days. A girl who looked around 13 years old poked her head inside the door and introduced herself. Daphne lived in the cottage by the pond opposite the big farmhouse where the owners lived. My mother fussed over her and invited her to stay and help us with the beds, which I was most put out about since Daphne didn't know how to do hospital corners. I whined, "Mom, she's not making the corners right." She gave me a fierce look and allowed this stranger to mess up our beds. My initial reaction to Daphne didn't prevent us becoming good friends, though. We shared the same Halloween birthday, and it sealed our friendship. Daphne craved companionship with a desperation akin to mine. An only child, stuck on an out-of-the-way farm. Overjoyed to have a younger girl to impress, she told me things which catapulted me, theoretically, into adolescence before I even knew or needed to know the miserable condition existed. Monthly periods and ladies' public lavatories with strange machines on the walls, selling things you used for your periods. Important stuff I needed to know. Next lesson, my initiation into the world of bras. She lent me one of hers and told me to stuff it with handkerchiefs. She gave me a complete crash course on how to survive my impending change into womanhood, something I had no intention of growing into if I could help it. I joined Daphne in a little choir at a church in the area, the only choir I would ever join in my childhood, despite my love of singing. Sad to say, I lost my friend after 4 months of glorious friendship. Her family decided to move on to different pastures. I missed her so much. I loved her as a sister and depended on her. Her absence meant no more intimate chats, no more sisterly secrets, and no more choir. After she left, My whole attitude towards the farm changed, and the sinking feeling I experienced before we left the huts returned, as if it had been an omen that things wouldn't be as wonderful as my dad had said they were going to be. I didn't understand why I could never keep any of the good things. A series of losses composed my life. Each loss etched into my soul sadness wounds that left scars. Only these scars were invisible, so nobody but me knew that my soul had bled. Mum received a shock soon after our arrival that must have caused her to wonder if we wouldn't be homeless before we barely unpacked. Mrs. Mangles, the wife of the owner of Park Farm, assumed I would not be attending school, but be free to help my mother clean her huge house. Mum insisted on me going to school. As a 10-year-old, the law demanded it, but no one would have known if I didn't, since I came from another county and had to be registered. Mum said she couldn't believe the antiquated notions her new employer held to. In Essex, the age rules being a year behind Suffolk, it was back to junior school for me. It hardly mattered. With so many crucial gaps in my education, at my new school, St. George's, also known as Canterbury Road School, I ended up in a class for backward children, there being no remedial classes. My teacher utilized me as a reading teacher for a group of children who could barely read a word. I complained bitterly to Mum that I didn't get to read any good books for myself. Horrified, she visited the school, and the teacher told her I wasn't handling arithmetic at all well. Basic concepts were beyond my grasp, and I could not be in a regular classroom as my deficits affected other important school subjects. Mum gave up. I wanted to fit in though, so I asked her to buy me an oversized pencil for school, one like the backward children wrote so laboriously with. Only I didn't tell her that. Armed with the big pencil, I deliberately printed my words in large, awkward letters, thinking my teacher would be pleased. Her wrath came down on me. No idea why. Everything academically and socially at St. George's went badly for me. The bullying continued. A daily battle to avoid attacks, physical and verbal. At playtime, lured behind the bushes on the playing field, pushed onto the ground, surrounded by a group of children who each took a turn at kicking me as I lay curled up on the grass. I would have loved to have been in the school choir, but David and I arrived after the new term started, so the choir members had already been picked. I lacked the confidence to ask to try out. I also missed being picked for Christmas concert parts. I watched the other children doing their song and dance routines and envied them. It seemed a lifetime ago that I struggled to dance up on the Hippodrome Theatre stage, doing my best to be the little star Din Din claimed I was born to be. David soon settled in and joined a stamp club, but I found that hobby rather boring and didn't envy him in the least, except that he seemed happy. That I did envy. When we first arrived at the farm, the owner, a retired army colonel, let my father have the use of an old black Morris car, not insured to run on public roads, but he'd let his license lapse after we left the flat in Mildenhall, so no hindrance there. Since we lived 1.5 miles from Mersey Road, where the buses ran, Mum appreciated a ride to catch the bus into Colchester to do shopping. And David and I liked to ride on school days. Dad used Cherry Tree Lane, a winding dirt pathway leading through the fields to the bus stop opposite the Cherry Tree pub. Then the Morris broke down, and the Colonel refused to pay for repairs. David and I were forced to learn every twist and turn along the lane so we could find our way home from school in the dark. Dad set out to find second-hand bikes for us, but Mum couldn't ride a bike and didn't want to, so she had to walk everywhere. When the bikes arrived, we arranged to leave them at a cottage near the bus stop and pick them up on the way home. Riding in the rain or fog was miserable, and sometimes we were drenched by the time we hopped on the bus to take us to school. The Morris was a big loss to our little family. The entire area around Park Farm belonged to the military for use as a training ground for field exercises. At the end of Beerchurch Hall Road stood the Military Corrective Training Centre, holding prisoners in Nissen huts, memories of Mildenhall. If a prisoner escaped, the siren sounded and a search party set out. I worried that the escapee would find his way to our little bungalow in the middle of the night and attack us. That siren disturbed me, but especially when making my way home along the dark lane all by myself. I often had to stay in after school as punishment, and David didn't always wait for me. One day, when I hadn't arrived home with my brother for the umpteenth time, Din cycled to the main road, caught a bus, marched into the school to find me standing in the assembly hall all by myself. "Do you have any idea how far she has to travel to get home?" he raged at one of the teachers, demanding they stop keeping me in. His intervention worked, at least until the following year, when I attended a different school to David. Then we both made our own way home alone. I don't know how David handled the journey home alone along the lane, but I found it a frightening experience. Dark, ominous hedges on either side, scary outlines of trees, and a gravel hill at the halfway point where I walked my bike up, making me more vulnerable to a possible attack. I sang out loud all the way, one song straight after the other to chase away the fear. Some of my fears were irrational, but the thought of being attacked by an escaped prisoner had in some degree been projected onto me by my mother. She had asked Din to speak to the area warden about keeping an ear out for me. My grandfather acted as gamekeeper for the Colonel's private wood, so he knew the man who patrolled the area. The warden agreed to listen for my singing, and if he ever heard me stop, would reach me as quickly as he could, because silence meant trouble. How any of them knew I sang my way home baffled me, but when Mum told me about the area warden's instructions, I knew I must never stop. Singing would get me home in one piece, as long as the gaggle of geese, who defended the farm and chased me all the time, didn't get to me on the other side of the bottom farm gate. Thank you for listening. Please feel free to subscribe, like, or comment on this reading, and hopefully you will tune in to the next one. Bye for now.